Hi, I want to welcome you from the MIT Endicott House. That's their executive retreat center, where I'm both attending and having the privilege to speak here at the Gathering of Titans. What I want to share with you is, look, there's only going to be two jobs left when all of this stuff kind of settles out around AI and the importance of you finding a fishing hole for the talent that you need. But first, look, I think I've got to update what I talked about on the last video. I think Alex Ovechkin nailed it, the team captain for the Washington Capitals. Remember, he decided not to go on at the Tonight Show. Here he wins the scoring award, most scores ever in hockey. Yet he decides not to go on any of those shows because he needs to rest. Well, let's speed forward earlier this week. It's game one of the Stanley Cup playoffs for them. He scores not only the first goal, but for the first time in his history, he scores in overtime in a playoff game, and that wins it for them 3-2. Now, they're up 2-0. We'll see how they do here this evening. So let me get back to the topic. You know, we were reflecting on AI and what it may do in order to kind of replace all the people that we've got on the planet that are out there working. And it took me back to 1983 that when I launched the Young Entrepreneurs Organization, I had teamed up with John Naisbitt. Now, John had written a book called Megatrends, but back then, you know, they didn't write it. They hire a young person to do it, and it happened to be a guy named Gavin Claybaugh. Now, Gavin graduated from Rice University, and you may or may not know that's kind of the leading university for futurists. And so I got to spend a year with him as they used this fancy thing that we later found was the internet. It was these Lockheed databases to identify the top young entrepreneurs under the age of 30, which, by the way, was Steve Jobs and Michael Dell and that whole group. And we got sitting around talking. And if you can imagine, 40 years ago, he said, look, I think the way this is all going to be playing out is that there will only be two jobs left for us human beings, one of two. And that is, we're either going to be a poet, creatives, or we're going to be soldiers fighting it out. And I think what's interesting, if we look at what Tim Ferriss talks about, at the end of the day, we're really only good at doing creative work about 2 to 3 hours a day. That's what the great artists did. And I think that's where we're headed, where AI and robotics is going to be able to take over all the administrivia and other stuff that we want to do so that we can really go pursue what is the creative activities that are important for us as humans to do. And so my hope is that we end up having a lot more poets than the soldiers. Yet I want to honor the soldiers that have allowed us to be able to have the kind of freedoms in order for us to be able to pursue our creative activities, which then I think leads to kind of a key question. And it was in a piece that I shared in my weekly insights on Friday. I thought it was interesting that Palantir here, they're in the defense industry, put out an announcement that they were going to be hosting $5,400 a month interns right out of high school. They said, hey, skip college, skip all of the indoctrination, they called it, and jump right into the workforce. And it reminded me when earlier I had a chance to interview Ginny Rometty, who was the former CEO of IBM, and she had put together a very interesting program called P-Tech. Look, we all need a source of unbelievable talent. And what they've done is they've gone to unbelievable 16-year-olds in high school that have really promising skills around tech and said, look, if you head off to college, you're probably going to fall behind. And right now you are the most creative. And so if you can earn the badges we expect you to earn when you're 17 and 18, we'll hire you right out of high school. Now, she went on to say, many of them go on to attend college. And we know for a lot of us that have kids that that would probably be much better for them later on. That was their alternative fishing hole. I remember I had a client right here at the MIT program. She had a chain of carpet stores and she needed carpet salespeople. And I'll tell you one place it's not good to hire from, and that is the competition. Not only do you have to train them, but you have to untrain them. In her case, she also really couldn't pay them that much more if they were top for their competitor. And so what we helped her do is look at her buyer persona, and at least in the US, who tends to buy carpet are women, and it's a fashion item. And so we said, what other industry is a fashion item for women? And we looked at jewelry, we looked at purses, and settled on shoes. If you were tops in selling shoes, you could still only make about half what you could selling carpet. And so that's where she put all of her ads out recruiting. And she didn't mention the industry. She just said, hey, are you top in this field? Would you like to make twice as much? Apply. And then they were super happy that they had an opportunity to make twice as much. When we talked about Gene Brown and he needed to find people on the back of his garbage truck, that's what had him constrained. He ended up stumbling across this idea to go into these gyms that were all throughout Ireland, where there are all these disaffected, particularly young men that many cases were maybe going to be heading to jail or to the streets. And he said, look, I'm going to cut you a deal. If you're willing to sign on for 36 months, and by the way, 36 months sounds a lot less than 3 years. Words do cast spells. And so if you're willing to sign on for 36 months, and he was lucky to keep anybody on the back for 3 months, then I will give my time, my money, you give me your evenings, and I will train you for your next profession, whether that's a plumber or electrician or truck driver. And look, what do all countries need? And so he put these flyers up and he said, hey, what a chance to work out, especially great for athletes. And now, these folks working out, do they want the trucks to go slower or faster? Do they want the bins to be lighter or heavier? Do they want the weather to be good or bad? Look, these are Rocky Balboa moments. And sure enough, that allowed Gene to scale from 60 employees to over 1,200 as he went global with that idea. And that became his fishing hole. Last, we've got a client that needed just general talent for his firm. He's out of Florida, but he went to the University of Michigan. And we just had a chance to listen to one of our fellow entrepreneurs that's teaching at the University of Michigan. And he said the athletic department, the student athletic department, has a separate kind of placement office than the general placement. And look, there are really 4 things you want to hire people for. The first is will. And look, you can't really train for that. You've got to hire for it. And if you're a student athlete, you probably have already exuded that kind of sense of will to get up early, to deal with success and failure. Number 2, does it match the values? Number 3, can you get results? And generally, if you've been a student athlete and you've had some success, that's demonstrated. Then last is skill. And we know how much that's changing. And so that became his consistent fishing hole. So whether you need talent on the back of your garbage truck, you're looking for technologists for some of the top companies in the world, some salespeople to work in your store, what's best is if you can find a consistent fishing hole where you can go for talent. And then once you do, once you hire a few, then referrals out of that fishing hole are going to be the best for you. So anyway, welcome again from the MIT Endicott House, and hopefully some ideas there to help you as you get those A players plus AI that's going to be critical to scale. Keep scaling.